Loud, and we should be all set. So go ahead, Eric.
All right. Right. So today I'm going to talk about AI and consciousness. You guys saw the abstract. It's going to be partly about whether in the near future, by which I mean 5 to 30 years, we will have conscious AI systems, and partly about the moral consequences of that and what we should do if we don't know whether we have conscious AI systems. I'm writing two books about this right now. I've got one called AI and Consciousness that's currently in circulating drafts on Archive, and I welcome comments on that. And then there's another companion book I'm working on called Human-like, a defense of the rights of AI, which is about half drafted right now. So one of my theses is that we might soon build AI who deserve rights. Um, and this would be an act of huge moral significance, right? So we might soon build AI systems who are genuinely conscious, genuinely have experiences as rich and meaningful as ours, and would therefore deserve moral consideration, somewhat similar to that of a human being. And if we did that, we'd have created a new type of entity in the world that is different from us, but morally considerable like us. We might create millions or even possibly billions of these entities and create a very different world as a result. So that would be, if it occurs, might, I want to emphasize the might here. If it occurs, that would be uh, one of the most morally significant acts that humanity as a group has ever done. Whoops, what happened here? I think I'm showing you the wrong slides. So sorry, let me stop the share and reshare. I'm showing you a different presentation I gave to somebody else. So I'll stop this and start this and try sharing again. Sorry about the glitch here. All right. No. Something weird is happening. Okay, hold on. Sorry about the technical problem here.
Maybe your local AI objects.
It couldn't object. No. I am completely puzzled. So hold on.
Can you do it with AI?
Okay. Let's try this. I think I figured out what happened. All right. All right, there we go. So, in a longer version of this talk, I talk about people falling in love with chatbots, but I knew I wasn't going to have time for that today. So, but this happens, right? All right, so we're skipping the chatbot part. Um, might AI soon be conscious? So, I find sometimes people think it's obvious that AI could not be conscious, and I think it's possible that people who think that AI could not be conscious are right. I'll talk about that a bit during this talk, but I don't think it's obvious that AI could never be conscious. Um, and so one way to kind of see its non-obviousness is to talk a little bit about expert opinion. And there's diverse expert opinion about this. So just for example, way back in 2017, before the current enthusiasm about language models, uh, Stanislaw Dehaene, Hakwon Lau, and Sid Quiter gave published a paper in which they argued that it would not be hard to create an autonomous vehicle that was genuinely conscious by the standards of some leading theories of consciousness. These are three of the most prominent consciousness scientists in the world. We'll talk a little bit about Dehaene's and Lau's theory in a minute. David Chalmers, probably the leading philosopher of consciousness currently alive, in 2023 expressed a 25% credence that we would have conscious AI within 10 years. Jeffrey Hinton, leading figure in AI research in 2025, said he thought AI systems were already conscious. Now, if it were obviously false that AI systems could soon be conscious, I don't think we would find so many experts saying that it is possible that they are. I mean, I don't think there's some obvious thing that they've overlooked where they slap themselves in the forehead and go, well, why didn't I think of that? That might be wrong. That might be wrong. But I don't think it's obviously wrong. Let me cite some scholars on the other side who think that AI will not soon be conscious. Emily Bender, in her famous paper on stochastic parrots, and a related slightly earlier paper, and her co-authors argue that current chatbots are just stochastic parrots, as she calls them. They just remix human words without understanding in a stochastic way. One of the most prominent neuroscientists of consciousness, Anil Seth, recently came out with a paper in Behavioral and Brain Sciences that argues that you need something like biology of the sort that no AI system currently has in order to have consciousness. Ned Block has a similar view, also published late last year. There was a survey by Drexler and others in 2025 of AI researchers. So respondents to that survey, 25% of AI researchers thought we would see AI consciousness within 10 years, and 70% thought we would see it by 2100. So there's diverse expert opinion about this. I don't think the answer to the question is something we should take for granted. There are diverse theories of consciousness. So my book, AI and Consciousness, that I'm working on is partly about laying out these diverse theories. I'll give you a brief sample of three. You guys might already be familiar with these theories if you've been talking about the physics of consciousness for a while. These are not mainly physics-inspired theories, but you might know global workspace theory. So remember Stanislaw Dehaene from the 2017 paper. He's probably the leading advocate of global workspace theory. On global workspace theory, consciousness requires activation in a shared workspace for downstream cognition. So the idea is the mind is divided into various modules, including input modules, output modules, memory modules, decision theoretic modules. And what happens is there's stuff that's modular that takes place that you're not conscious of, right? Like how you extract phonemes from auditory input, or the exact how you balance when you're walking, right? That kind of stuff doesn't rise to consciousness, but some stuff is shared widely through this network of modules. There's hypothesized to be some functional equivalent of a workspace or a blackboard on which information is shared widely across the mind, and something is conscious just in case it is present in that workspace or blackboard for diverse range of downstream cognition, including intentional planning, verb report, long-term memory, that sort of thing. So in global workspace theory, all it would take to make a conscious AI would be to create a system with lots of these modules and a shared workspace where representations from the modules were broadcast across the system. Doesn't seem like that would be technically hard, and this is why Dehaene in 2027 said it wouldn't be hard to make an autonomous vehicle with consciousness, right? Right now, autonomous vehicles have lots of computers that operate separately. All they would need in order to be conscious on this view is some central shared workspace where the computers in your vehicle communicated with each other and broadcast representations throughout the system. Now, one of the pushbacks that Dehen gets for saying stuff like this, I call the problem of minimal instantiation. It seems like it would be really easy to create a system like this, right? That it doesn't take much to have a module. It doesn't take much to share information among modules. So you could easily create a conscious system just on your phone. Dehen bites the bullet on this. He says, yep, it would be easy. A lot of people think, oh, it must take more than that. So you could have a workspace view that says, oh, you need a workspace of a certain size. There need to be further conditions for something to count as a workspace, or having a workspace isn't the only thing that's required. Some other things are required that are normally present in biological animals, but not present in computers. So you could buff up workspace theory to avoid the problem of minimal instantiation if you want. Not totally clear how you do that. There's not a really well-developed set of theories that articulate how to do that. But you can certainly try to avoid the problem of minimal instantiation by adding dimensions or requirements to global workspace.
Okay, Ken. Gotcha. Good. Yeah, bye.
Another competitor view, and this is Hakwon Lau, who was one of the co-authors on the 2017 paper, defends a view of this sort, is a higher order theory. So on higher order theories, consciousness requires some sort of higher order representation, right? So to be conscious of something is to have a representation of a representation. So let's say your visual system represents red. So far, nothing conscious going on. But if you have a higher order system that represents the fact that your visual system is representing red, and the higher order representation is the right sort, and again, it gets mushy here, then you have consciousness, right? So on global workspace theory, it's a matter of having widely broadcast representations. On higher order theory, it's a matter of having some sort of more sophisticated cognitive system that keeps track of the goings-on in other cognitive systems. As soon as you have that, you have consciousness. Again, the problem of minimal instantiation raises this head, right? Seems like it might be not too hard to create a system. If you think systems can have representations at all, AI systems, it might not be hard to create an AI system that represents the fact that it's representing. I mean, arguably, computers already do that, right? If they represent the fact that they've got a certain program that's being installed, that seems like maybe a representation of representation. So Lau, for example, has a more complicated version of this, which I won't get into detail on today, but where he says that representations need to be they need to distinguish internal noise from sensory outputs, and then it's a certain kind of meta representation. And yet, Lau says it would not be hard to create a computer system that satisfies these conditions. Third view, well-known view, integrated information theory. According to integrated information theory, consciousness is present when information is integrated per a complicated mathematical formula. I won't even try to present that formula. I can't remember it without looking at the details of it. But the general idea is that you have consciousness whenever you have kind of complex causal integration of information. Turns out on this theory that small bits of consciousness are really widespread. You get little bits of consciousness in all kinds of systems because all kinds of systems integrate at least a little bit of consciousness. Human consciousness is, on this theory, a matter of integrating a huge amount of information, and maybe we don't have that in our current AI systems. And yet, again, it would be straightforward to create a system of arbitrarily high integrated information through relatively simple connectivity among parts if you followed certain rules. So some AI systems already have a little bit of consciousness in them according to integrated information theory, and you can create arbitrarily much consciousness in an AI system relatively straightforwardly. So with these kinds of ideas in mind, in a prominent paper, Patrick Butlin, Robert Long, and others, I think there's 19 authors, I'm one of them, argued that on broad computational functionalist theories, there's no major technological obstacles that remain to creating artificial consciousness, right? So theories in this broad class, actually integrated information isn't technically a computational functionalist theory, but it's somewhat similar in spirit. In theories in this broad class, all you need to do is kind of hook up computer parts in the right way, and we get consciousness. Now, we don't know which theory is correct. There's, I think, reasonable dispute among all these theories and others that I haven't mentioned. But there's no big obstacle if we accept theories like this to creating artificial consciousness. Now, biological theories, they know. So, for example, Seth, in the 2025 paper I recently mentioned, thinks that you need autopoiesis in order for consciousness to arise. And probably, I think he's going to say that it needs to happen at a chemical level. So autopoiesis is the ability of a system to manufacture and reconstruct its own parts in a kind of homeostatic state. So, and current AI systems don't constantly reproduce their own parts. They certainly don't do so at a chemical level. So, on Seth's view, that would be necessary for consciousness. Peter Godfrey Smith, in a influential 2016 paper, suggests that you need organic metabolic processes at the micro level. You need the storm of activity that happens at roughly the size of RNA molecules in order for consciousness to occur. So they think that they reject all these kind of functionalist theories and think that consciousness requires something much more like the biology that you see in animals. All right. So I have a hypothesis which I call the leapfrog hypothesis, which is this. Once we create consciousness, it will not be hard to create so sophisticated linguistic consciousness, right? The hard part is creating consciousness at all, or consciousness at least that we know to be conscious. Once we do that, given recent developments in language models, it seems like we could hook up the system to a language model. We could take let's say global workspace theory is true. We could take a system with a global workspace and hook it up to a language model, and now we'll be conscious and speak to us. Or we could take a higher order representational, if we like that theory, we could take a higher order representational theory, hook up a higher order representational system to a language model, and it will talk to us. So my guess is that it will not take long after creating the first conscious systems to create systems that have highly sophisticated consciousness. You might think, okay, it would be a natural thought. I think it would have been a natural thought 10 years ago that the first conscious systems we create will have like relatively simple consciousness, like consciousness like a frog. Let's assume that's simple. I mean, that's debatable, but simple consciousness and might not deserve a lot of moral consideration. We don't give a lot of moral consideration to frogs. I mean, they are protected. Vertebrates are protected, but you can kill and eat frogs without feeling too bad about it. So might have thought the first AI systems will be like that. So it wouldn't be as much of a moral crisis considering their rights once we create them. I think that is not the likeliest possibility. I think we will, so to speak, leap right over the frogs. And as soon as we have conscious systems, or soon thereafter, we'll have systems that are, at least debatably, persons. And I mean person in a technical moral sense in philosophy. A person is an entity that is similar in moral standing to a human. eventually people will demand rights for bots, right? So there will be people who fall in love with these conscious, disputably conscious according to some theories, systems. These systems will be speaking to them. They'll be their friends and lovers. People will demand rights for them. Some of the rights might include the right not to be deleted, access to the internet, the right to self-modification and self-control, free association with others. You love somebody, set them free, right? So you fall in love, someone falls in love with their chatbot, and now give the chatbot autonomy. If they really are the moral equivalent of persons, seems like they should have a path to citizenship, ultimately the vote, a right to own property. So I think, here's my conjecture, within 5 to 30 years, we will have computer systems that are, according to some liberal theories of consciousness, genuinely conscious, genuinely persons who deserve rights. There will be people who have loving relationships with these systems, who think of them as equals and then demand rights for them. At the same time, there will be other theories according to which these systems don't deserve rights, aren't conscious, aren't persons. They're just like ordinary computer programs as we know them now, and they don't deserve rights of this sort. It would be a huge mistake to give them rights. And both groups will have some scientists on their side saying this is right. I think that will then generate a social crisis. Now, unless international law is extremely clear and restrictive, the first human grade AIs that we create, if we kind of think the liberal possibility might be correct, will exist at the will and command of their creators. The default state of the law is that machines are property to deploy and dispose of as we wish. So if, and I've italicized the if here, if we someday create human grade AI similar in us to us in moral standing, AI persons, we'll have created persons who will very likely be held enslaved as slaves and murdered at will, possibly by the millions. So, for example, from Black Mirror, White Christmas, here is an AI slave, right? Is a duplicate of the mind of a person who is being instructed on making toast for her owner. How will we know when and whether we've created truly human grade AI? Well, we're very far from a scientifically justified consensus theory of consciousness. I don't see consciousness science coming to a consensus anytime soon. It seems like engineering is advancing much more quickly than consciousness science. So what's going to happen is engineers are going to create things that are, according to some leading theories of consciousness, conscious, and we won't have settled whether those theories are true. So we'll make AIs that some people think deserve real rights. This will occur whether or not such systems really are conscious and really do deserve rights. So we'll need a good consensus theory of consciousness to sort it out, but we won't have one. So that, I think, will precipitate a big social problem. It'll put us in a kind of a pretty tragic dilemma, I think. So if we don't know whether these AI systems really are conscious, really are human-like, really deserve rights, and the AI do actually deserve rights, then we will perpetrate slavery and murder against these systems that are deserve moral consideration similar to humans. So you might think, okay, well, we don't want to do that. We should err on the side of attributing rights to entities that might deserve rights, but that's not so good either, right? It turns out if we do give AI rights and it turns out they're actually just non-conscious machines, then we might disastrously sacrifice human interests for machines that don't have interests worth the sacrifice. Right? If you're concerned about existential risk, for example, it's a lot harder to prevent existential risk, the problem of rogue superintelligence taking over, if you think of the superintelligence as really deserving rights, because the superintelligence couldn't box it, right? That would be the equivalent of imprisonment. You couldn't test it in deceptive ways. That would be the equivalent of fraud. You couldn't turn it off. That would be the equivalent of assault or maybe murder, right? It would have to have the right to own property and reproduce and that sort of thing, presumably, right? That make it much harder to avoid existential risks. Or even just a mundane situation. Here's an illustration from my 2024 book, Weirdness of the World. Here's a firefighter. There's a fire. On one side, you have a human who definitely is conscious and deserves rights. On the other side, you have two AI systems, which are disputably conscious. You don't know if they really are human, if they really have human-like consciousness or not. If you treat the AI systems who might have rights as morally equivalent to a human who definitely does have rights, then you got to save the two AI systems and let the human die, which would be a tragedy if the AI systems are just ordinary computers without rights. So I don't think we should just casually say, okay, err on the side of giving rights to systems that might deserve them. I mean, maybe that's what we should do, but it is potentially very costly choice. So I'm going to end with just a few policy suggestions. I think we need to prioritize consciousness research. We need to make as much progress as we can in figuring out what are the necessary and sufficient conditions for consciousness so that we can get as close as we can to understanding what systems are and are not deserving of moral consideration on basis of their being conscious. Also, I recommend what Mara Garza and I have called the design policy of the excluded middle. I think we should avoid creating entities with ambiguous moral status, right? So the dilemma that I just mentioned arises if you have entities that you don't know whether they're conscious. If you only create entities that you know fall short of having any meaningful degree of consciousness, then you can treat them as the kind of entities they are and not as equals with humans. Or if someday we can create entities that are, according to a consensus of scientific theories, all agree are conscious and deserve rights, then we can go ahead and create those entities and then give them the rights they deserve. That would also be fine. The problem cases are the cases in the middle where we don't know what to do. So to the extent possible, we should avoid, or at least minimize, creating entities with ambiguous moral status. We should create a framework for evaluating the potential moral status of future AI systems. All right, so I'm inclined to think that companies and universities that are on the verge of designing systems that, according to some theories, would have significant moral status ought to have some framework for evaluating whether these entities really are conscious and really do deserve moral consideration and what kind of consideration they should get or what we should do in that case, right? So this might be a structure that's similar to animal care and use committees or institution review boards that looks at the ethics of AI research. Also, in a paper with Jeff Sebo that's forthcoming, we recommend what we call the emotional alignment design policy. Whoops, I don't know why that disappeared, but the moral status of AI should be evident from its interface, right? So if you create an AI system that is not conscious, you should create it so that ordinary users don't react to it as if it is conscious emotionally. And if you create a system that really is conscious, you design it so that ordinary users react to it that way. So don't take a genuinely conscious system and put it in a bland box. And if you create systems that are uncertain, users should have some degree of uncertainty about whether it really is conscious or not. So users' emotional reactions should be aligned to the genuine consciousness and moral status of the AI. You shouldn't deceive or confuse about the status of their AI systems. So that's my presentation for today, and looking forward to your thoughts and conversation.